Hello everyone, and welcome to Kidventure's Video Game Addiction online webinar. I'd like to thank you all for taking some time out of your evenings to join us. And hopefully this presentation will give you guys a great understanding not only of how video games are designed nowadays to directly engage certain parts of a child's psychology development, but how to use those same methods and those same techniques to help engage children in other areas as we have here at Kidventure. My name is Patrick Byron, and this is my 7th year with Kidventure Camps. And I currently oversee the Dallas and overnight camp programs. You can email me any questions you might have at patrick@kidventure.com, and I'm happy to respond as best I can. Let's go ahead and get started. This first quote is a great way for me to really sum up what the point of video game addiction is. And this is from an online review of a video game called Modern Warfare 3, which many of you might have heard of. And no matter whether I play for 5 minutes or 5 hours, Modern Warfare 3 always makes me feel like I'm accomplishing something. And the key part here is accomplishing something. And we'll see that video games, for all intents and purposes, have evolved. And they've changed in terms of what their goal has been. And we'll see that. And because of that change in goal, they've changed the way that they design them as well. Now, some of you might be here because you have a child who's a young teen and you fully believe that they're addicted to video games. Some of you might be here because you have a young child who's just getting to the point where they're beginning to play them and you want to make sure that you have all the knowledge you need to kind of guide them as most appropriately through video games. And then also, you might be here because maybe even you yourself or your spouse, plays a lot of video games and you're just kind of curious. Whatever the case may be. Welcome, and hopefully this presentation will help you out and give you some great answers and some great points to move forward. Now, the first main piece for us to look at is what is a video game, which seems very, very simple, but it's actually very hard to define all video games with one definition. This is the best one that I could come up with. It's an electronic activity that involves human interaction with a user interface to generate visual feedback on a video device. Now, obviously, that's so broad it would include many other things, but games have become so diverse nowadays. They are now not only on gaming consoles or Game Boys or things like that. They're now on our TVs. They're now on Facebook. They're now on our cell phones or iPods. They're everywhere, really. And so we really have to kind of understand the different types of video games. Now, there's 3 main types of video games, as I like to break them up. And they all have very different purposes and very different goals in mind. And although they all maybe will use some of the techniques we'll talk about, really only one of them leads to what people would term as addicting behavior towards video games. The first one really to look at is something that is called recreational. Now, recreational, their object is to entertain for a finite period of time. Think of this as the classic arcade game. You go in and you enjoy it and you play it, or maybe the classic NES, Super Nintendo, where you take it home and you buy it. They really don't mind how long you play it. Say that you bought that Super Nintendo game and you brought home Super Mario Brothers or Donkey Kong or Duck Hunt. It really doesn't affect the manufacturer how long you play that at home, as long as you come back to play it again. Or in the case of the arcade, or in the case of the at-home example, as long as you buy Pong 2, something like that. So these really were just there to entertain. It was no type of long-term piece with that. Educational is another piece that's really evolved out of the third type we'll talk about in just one sec. But these are really done almost as kind of a reaction to how a lot of parents and role models have viewed video games in the past and in recent years. And that they're there to teach basic life skills. They're there to use video games and that media as a way to encourage kids in educational pursuits. And the third main type is occupational. And this is really where we start to see the symptoms of what someone would call video game addiction. And the object here is to produce a long-term pattern of desired activity from players. So what this means is, as opposed to recreational, the point here is to keep you playing the same game for as long as possible. It doesn't really matter to them if you buy another game. They want you to continue playing the exact same game. And that's where this habitual activity comes from. And the key there is long-term pattern of desired activity. There's nothing actually about fun involved with that, which sounds very, very counterintuitive, but we'll go into that in just one sec. So, what are the techniques used to create an addicting video game? This might seem a little bit strange, but let's go into it a little bit to kind of break it down in a way that maybe we can understand. The first thing that we have to start to understand is a psychological piece, which is called the Skinner box. Now, the Skinner box was something that was developed by a scientist named B.F. Skinner. And the Skinner box was essentially a way to train an animal to do a certain action to get a certain result. Now, this is a very complicated looking grid, but at the end of the day, what this essentially has is a response lever, and the animal is taught to press down that response lever for food to drop out of the food dispenser. That's really the ultimate goal of this. And there's other kind of pieces involved in this, but we're only going to focus on those two pieces. So one thing to note is that at no point does the animal naturally want to press the lever. There's really no advantage to it. It's not born with, and it doesn't naturally develop any urge to press the lever. But it does have an urge to eat food. That is natural to it. So what they do is whenever they place this animal in the Skinner box, occasionally they will manually press down the lever so that the animal can see the lever being pressed down, and when that happens, a piece of food drops down. Much like training a dog. If anyone has ever trained a dog, you essentially have to walk them through the process so they understand that one action or one command leads to another response. Now, that one command they would normally never respond to or understand, but because of that pellet of food, because of the reward, they then have a natural desire and understanding of what they need to do. So, one very key thing here is that animal learns to press the lever when it's hungry. Excuse me. And going back to our definition of occupational video games, the object is to use human interaction, which would be pressing the lever, to produce a long-term pattern of activity desired from players, which would be pressing that lever a long, long time and not stopping. So really, how do you get someone to continually press it? Well, by using a Skinner box, game designers are now able to get players to do these type of actions, whatever that might be, they normally wouldn't want to do in a video game, which might be, for example, playing the exact same level over and over again. But why would players want to do this? And probably more importantly, let's take it back down to the core of it. Why do game developers want to do this? Well, game developers really back in the day had video games like Pong, where you would buy it once, say for $50 or whatever amount it costs. And as I was saying earlier, you would buy that one piece one time, and at the end of the day, they really didn't care how long you played Pong at home as long as you bought Pong 2. And they really didn't care how long you played Pong 2 as long as you liked it enough to buy Pong 3. Now, that has been contrasted with nowadays whenever they buy new video games that are called, typically what you'll hear them called is MMORPGs, which is a long kind of letter algorithm or anagram for massively multiplayer online role-playing games. And the key with these is that you not only pay once for the video game, you then have to pay $15 each month to continue playing the video game you've already paid for. So if you look at the fact that it typically might take them, a year at least to come out with Pong 2, not only are you making that $50, but you're then going to make $15 each month that people play. In one example, World of Warcraft is a very, very common, it's a very well-known video game. That's one of those MMORPGs. And that game the single game has been running for about 10 years now, and it has just over 11 million active subscribers. And what that means is that they have 11 million people that are paying $15 each month to play that video game. You can really see here that the profitability is almost limitless for these companies. And so game companies decided, okay, if we want one person to keep playing the exact same thing, how do we do that? Because this really does save them money. Because at the end of the day, a video game is simply programming. It's mathematical equations that are put into a cause-effect relationship. So when the player does A, B is caused. And you can't program in an infinite amount of activities. So repetition is key, because since they can't program in an infinite amount of things, how it's very confined, there's only a certain number of moves or certain number of levels that you can have, you have to change the mechanics of a video game so that players will do the exact same thing over and over again, even if they don't find them fun the other times that they do them. And this is very, very key. We can think back here to the Skinner box in terms of why or how do we get that animal to press that lever, something that the animal isn't going to naturally find fun or anything like that. How do we make that fun for the animal? And the key is the pellets, the food pellets, whatever's dropped, that reward, that piece that we get out of doing that action. So first thing that they had to do was create digital food pellets. Now, this is something that's very hard for many of us to understand, myself included, but items and things that we find in video games are real. And I don't mean that in the sense that they're a physical object that we can touch somewhere. What I mean is that our brain defines them as a real object with real value. And here's an example. Right here's a diamond, and a diamond is a real object, and we give it a very, very high value. People pay lots and lots of money for a diamond. And there's many good reasons. They're very rare, they're very pretty. Many times they represent relationships and kind of a long, lifelong commitment, all these different things. But at the end of the day, they really are just a rock. It's a rock. It's an element that we have assigned a value to that's arbitrary, simply based on what our brain values that item as. In a video game, it's the exact same concept. So here we have a very special armor. Not only is it shiny, and it's rare, and it's hard to get, but it also protects you from video game ninja bunnies. So that's an example there of the item in the video game has a value. And in many cases, it can have just as much of a value as something that would be found at home or in real life, so to speak. The video game item industry. So there are ways for people to actually sell or literally buy with real money these items that you can find in video games. That industry is now over $1 billion each year. $1 billion with a B. And so you can see the value that people are attributing to these items. And so these are the food pellets. These are the things that people want and they assign a value to. And so the first thing that we have to understand is that these rewards are real. So when we come back to this, we have to also remember that we have to be offering our children rewards, food pellets, that they also find real and assign a high value to. So how do they make you press the lever? Well, thinking back to that box, how would you make the animal press the lever as fast and as often as possible? So what we mean by that is we want our players to continue playing as much as possible for as many months in a row as possible. And how do we get them to do that? How do we get them to, for example, play the exact same level every single day for 3 months in a row? Well, you drop the pellets at random. Thinking back to that analogy of the box, if a food pellet drops every single time the animal presses the lever, it's only going to press the lever when it's hungry because it can be totally comfortable knowing that the food will be there eventually. But if it drops randomly, so you never know when it'll drop, that hamster's going to panic, thinking, oh my gosh, maybe I won't have food when I need it later on, so it's going to sit there and try and save up pellets. Great to think about slot machines, exact same concept. He's using variable ratio rewards. Because of the randomization, because it's not every 100th, it's not every 10th, it's randomized at a very high number, people will continually play because of the mentality of just one more. Maybe the next one will be when that piece drops. Maybe the next time I complete that level is when it's going to let me get that piece of armor. Because the thing to realize is that these pieces of armor, the different food pellets or swords or weapons or whatever they're trying to collect in the video games, you get them by completing certain tasks. But they're won at random. So maybe after you complete that task, there's only a 10% chance for you to receive that item. So on average, you will have to do that exact same task 10 times to get that item. This is where video games are now able to get you to do that exact same thing over and over again because of the pellets that they've established, those real valuable items that you want. But at the end of the day, we're not animals in that sense, and we do have a pretty sharp intelligence. So since we're not doing this for food, we're not playing video games to eat and not starve to death, why in the world would we begin doing this? How in the world would we get ourselves into a position where we would want to value these items or things like that? Well, it's through a process called shaping, which was also developed through Skinner, and this is kind of the way that he weaned the animals. He could show us weaning in the animals to doing that task to press the lever to get the pellets. And it's very simple. It's actually simply easing people in. So what it means is that as soon as they made the connection that pressing the lever leads to food dropping, maybe the first time they press that lever, food immediately drops. The pellets and rewards come very fast the first few times that they press that lever, then slower and slower as we progress, as we go longer. And what that does is it gives them the taste of instant gratification, and that fuels the delayed gratification longer. Not only so that we will continue to do it without instant gratification, but it actually makes the delayed gratification even better because we know how hard we had to work to get it. So by easing you in to where, say in a video game, leveling is a very common piece in lots of video games. You'll even see it in Farmville or online Facebook games. There's so many levels. What'll happen is you can usually go from level 1 to level 2 in 2 minutes. It's very simple, very easy. But to get from level 2 to level 3, it's going to take you about 5 minutes. And to get from level 3 to level 4, it's going to take you about 20 minutes. And to get from level 4 to level 5, it's going to take you about an hour. And what this has done is it slowly but surely weans you into where you start to appreciate and assign a value to those pellets that they're dropping. The next piece that they do is by reducing stopping points. So this is a very common piece here. If you've ever had a child playing a video game and you say it's time for dinner, it's time to go to church, time for whatever it is, you might have heard this saying, I need to save my game. Wait, I need to save my game. What video game designers have done is they've created point A to point B types of levels. So say that you have to journey from point A to point B. You can't save your game until you make it all the way to point B. So if mom calls you down for dinner midway through and you turn off your machine, all of the work that you've put in to get halfway through is immediately lost. It deletes it, and you have to start all over again. So now, for us to not lose that progress, we want to make it all the way to B and then save. Now, one quick thing with that is they've learned is there's another alternative that they can kind of combine with that in some instances, and they make short and easy levels. So what that means is that same concept, you can't save between A and B, but they make them much, much shorter. It's not super long, and then they become like M&Ms. And what that means is, hey, mom and dad stopped yelling at me, maybe I can get one more level done before they yell at me again. I love peanut butter M&Ms. They are definitely my personal Achilles heel. And I never sit down saying, oh my gosh, I'm going to eat a whole bag of M&Ms. But throughout the day, I'll have some here, have some there, just one more, just one more. By the end of the day, I'm done with the bag. And it's the same concept there with those levels that they have. And finally, the biggest strength that these have, these pellets that they're dropping, these things that they're giving youth and adults and whoever is playing these video games, these things fill voids. They fill a void in our lives. And this is probably the most critical piece of what they have. And the analogy I give here is, imagine asking your kids, do they like doing their chores? Do they like studying all day for school? Do they like doing those things that they essentially are skipping on to play video games? The answer is usually going to be no. Obviously, every child's different. But the other analogy I can give to a lot of parents who've been through that terrible job that they hated. They hated that job. It was just not a good experience. What was lacking was probably a void. It wasn't meeting certain requirements for you. And video games are really, really good now at meeting these voids. So when we look at a middle schooler or even younger or even older, most of the times they feel disenfranchised from society. This is one of those voids. They feel like they don't have any friends, that their family doesn't understand them. They have terrible self-esteem many times. They don't feel like they belong. And video games are able to give them these things. They're able to give them control over their environment. They're able to make them feel like they are cool or that they have friends, that they belong. And most of these kids simply can't get this experience in the real world. So, if the things that we're getting in a digital world can be attributed the same value as the things we get in the real world, why not simply get them in a digital one? Now, we have to pay for them in a digital one, but at least we're still getting them. Or maybe mom and dad pay. You never know. So, what are those three things? Well, the three things are autonomy, complexity and purpose, and connection between effort and reward. And I'll go through each of these individually. But Malcolm Gladwell said to be satisfied with your life, you need these three things. And most teens don't even have two. And if you think back to that job you hated, you probably didn't have at least one or two. Well, at least two, probably all three of these. Autonomy is control. And what that means is that you have some say in what you do every day. You're not just a hamster on a wheel. You're able to control your choices, your rewards, your punishments, and you feel like you're not just someone else's puppet. Complexity and purpose means that it's not mindless repetition, and that not only are you able to choose what you're doing, but there's a point to it all. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. There's a reason and a method for what you're doing. And also, it breaks it down to where you understand the value of each step within a task, and that's where that complexity comes in. Each step has its own little piece, and it's broken down so that you can easily understand how to get from point A to point B. And you're not overwhelmed by perhaps the distance or how difficult it might be. The last piece is a connection between effort and reward. And what this is you can see and take credit for the results of your hard work. We've all been in that situation where you work really hard on some project for work or something like that, or in real life with your friends to put a party together, and someone else takes the credit, and we know how that makes us feel. Not having that connection between the effort of the hard work we put in and the reward makes us get to the point where we finally say, whatever, I don't care anymore. Why even put in the effort? Why even try? Why do these things? Because I'm not going to get recognized at the end anyways. Now, video games are specifically designed nowadays to give all three. This is occupational gaming. Educational games use it now too. Even recreational games use it now too. They all incorporate these three. And they're really, really good. And the thing that we'll come to realize is these three don't have to be absolute. They can be in what's called an illusion. We'll go into that in just a sec. But let me cover autonomy in video games. So in video games, probably about 75 to 80% of the ones that are out there nowadays, you can pick these things. You can choose exactly how you look. You can choose your talents, your friends, your job, your rewards, your punishments, where you live, everything. You can literally select and pick out the pieces of your life that you want to have. Now, for someone who is in elementary school or who is in middle school or who is in high school, think about how unhappy many times people going through puberty and young children, even as young as 3 years old, are, feeling that they can't control what's going on. They feel like everyone else is making decisions for them. To be able to control this is such a big piece of why video games seem addicting, because it fills such a big void for them in their mind. Complexity and purpose. What this means is that the players are going to do their tasks. They're going to do the same thing over and over again because it doesn't have simply a broken record style theme to it, because there is an end goal. So remember shaping. We wean them into the long bouts between rewards. And so because of that complexity doesn't necessarily mean that it's hard to do. It can simply mean that those tasks have to be done a lot of times or in a certain order, or you have to do them with other people in a certain way that kind of lead to that end goal. And that's where that main purpose comes in. So we're not just doing something for its own sake, we're doing it for that reward, for that pellet at the end that we want. Because again, we have to make sure we're giving pressing the lever a point and a meaning. And that's where this comes in, is pressing the lever leads to that pellet and that reward. The other thing too is quantified progress. This is really, really big, and this is something that we've had to really explore in our camp programs, is how do we give children quantified progress? It's not so much, there's one thing to say to a child, hey, I need you to pick up 20 pieces of trash or 15 pieces of trash. It's quite another to give them a reward and recognition for every 5 pieces that they pick up on their way to 15. In video games, they're very good at this. They're breakdown tasks to where you always are instantaneously given updates as you go through a task or a piece. And for anyone that's ever had a to-do list, if you're a to-do list person, it's very important to have those items listed out so you can check them off one by one, to break down and really see progress. Because if you don't see that progress, you lose that purpose and you lose that complexity, and you end up losing interest. Finally, connecting effort to reward. This is another really big one that video games are really good at. In one game, World of Warcraft, the one we mentioned earlier, when you level up, a golden plume of light shoots out of your body. And so what ends up happening is all of your friends are right around you because everyone plays in one area, just like this webinar, how multiple people from all different states can log in and see the same thing and hear the same thing. It's the same concept. And so everyone on their screen can not only see your body erupt in a giant plume of light, they all get a message saying, Patrick has leveled up to level 80. Way to go, Patrick, or whatever the saying is. And so at that point, suddenly you're getting public recognition. It's a very tangible reward. It's not just a number on a stat sheet that's hidden away in some file folder going up. It's something that is literal to your character that everyone can see, and that's instantaneous. And this is what most of us don't get in everyday life. I can only imagine how much more productive I would be if every time I completed a task for Kidventure, I had a gigantic plume of light shoot out of my body, and all of my associates got these messages on the computer screen. Patrick's awesome. He just completed this task. Look how cool he is. And that reward, that immediate and very, very tangible connection between the effort I've put in and the reward that I get is very, very, very felt in video games. Now, it's not about instant gratification. A lot of people will think that means that you don't have to work a long time to get something. That's not at all the point. Remember shaping? We weaned ourselves into that. So at first, obviously, you do need some instant gratification to kind of get that cycle and get that understanding going. But at the end of the day, we really get to a point where it's not about immediately getting what you want, because the harder you have to work, the more of accomplishment you feel. So the longer you had to work towards something, or the harder it was, obviously, the more rewarding it is. And we know that's essentially what our brains do. Our brains reward us for completing difficult tasks with the sense of accomplishment or fun. It's another way of looking at it. When someone shoots a basketball and it goes through the net, swish, nothing but net, beautiful shot, It's considered fun in our minds. We feel that sense of fun, and it's our brain rewarding us for completing a difficult task. We get a very different feeling if we don't get the ball inside the basket, or if we're not shooting from a distance. Everyone always loves to say that a half-court shot, a stadium will erupt, and that's because it's so hard to achieve that. But it's worth the work to get it. Intangible rewards, as we were saying earlier, so i.e. that golden beam of light when you level up, it's not something that's hidden or that other people wouldn't recognize or that you would have to really go out of your way to see and feel. So what does this all mean? Well, video game designer Aaron Hoffman said it very, very well. Addiction is not about what you do, but what you don't do because of the replacement of the addictive behavior. And what this means is when you get really, really interested in a video game, when you get really, really interested in something like that, playing it from time to time is nothing that's bad. A lot of parents, the last thing I ever want is parents to leave this webinar and say, my kids can never play video games again, or video games are bad. A lot of parents will use video games as rewards for kids doing chores, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that as long as you're making sure the video games themselves are appropriate. When it becomes a problem is when video games end up replacing other aspects of our children's lives that they should be doing or should be involved in to help make sure that they're growing up a balanced, diverse, and healthy life. So combine that, though, with the fact that most youth want a Skinner box. They want a place where they can be, where everything makes sense. Because right now, how often have we had to say to ourselves or to our older children, sometimes life just isn't fair. And they don't like that. They don't want that. They want to live in a place, they want to be in a place where they feel that they are the ultimate beginning and end of their success and beginning and end of their failure. No one else can control that. They have control over that, and they really respond to that because we don't really have that system in life. It's our job as parents then, and educators and camp counselors and all of us to make sure that the alternatives to video games that we present our kids with fill that void instead of video games. And so we essentially have to create a system of rewards and achievement that our children will find satisfying, that will fill those voids instead. And how do we do that? Well, that is the million-dollar question, so to speak. Let's go back to Malcolm Gladwell and his three main pieces here and kind of explore that. So we look at the three main steps: autonomy, complexity and variety, and connection between effort and reward. Now, parenting's hard, and obviously, any extra time or effort that you have to put into planning out activities or chores, many of us simply don't have. So please don't take this as me saying if you don't give your child all three of these in every single aspect of every activity that they ever do, you failed as a parent. That is the most ridiculous thing that you could ever walk away from this from. So please don't take that, because we know even in camp and even as parents ourselves, we're unable to achieve this. But by coming back to this on a frequent basis and reevaluating how we're treating our children with discipline, positive reinforcement, things like that, we're able to make sure, kind of stay on the path and not veer too far off in either direction and keep ourselves going as best we can down this route to fill those voids. So one thing to note is these are not mutually exclusive. You have to have all three of these to truly achieve it. And video games give our kids all three. So to replace that, we need to make sure that our pieces, our alternatives are giving them all three. I'm going to start with complexity and purpose. I'm going to come back to autonomy in a sec. And the question I always ask is, have you ever told your child to clean their room? Obviously, you probably have, unless they're, infantile. But if you've ever asked your child to clean their room, you say, you need to go clean your room, I'll be in 5 minutes to check. You go in, and the room is not clean by any means. But we need to take a step back, and this is something that's very hard for all of us to do, is to realize when we say clean the room, what is our child's understanding of what that means versus what is our understanding of what that means? So when you walk in, the child's room looks like a mess, but we suddenly realize that the dirty clothes aren't all over the floor. They're now in one single pile. That's in the middle of the room, but they're all in a pile. And their bed isn't made in that they haven't put their pillows back on straight and they haven't folded down the comforter once to make it look nice. But they straightened out the sheets and they pulled their comforter down and they at least put their pillows on the bed in some way. And so the thing that we have to realize here is that there might not be an intrinsic understanding of our children of what to do. And even if there was at one time, kids are very forgetful many times, and maybe they don't remember those different pieces. So when we say clean our room, that's very different than us saying, I need you to take all of your dirty clothes and I need you to put them into a dirty clothes basket, and I need you to make your bed, making sure you make it this way. And you need to put the throw pillows up, pieces like that. Complexity and purpose is key here, and that we're not just giving them a big, huge task that it's easy for them to get distracted from, that it's easy for them to feel overwhelmed by. We have to wean them in. We have to use shaping the exact same way, that video games do it. And that we have to break the tasks down, give easily achievable rewards at the beginning, and kind of work from there. Now, this is very, very key for a couple reasons. One thing I like to tell parents too, as a great tactic, in terms of cleaning rooms, things like that, do we ever talk about everyone's chores? And this comes down to the purpose point. So why do your kids, for example, have to put their clothing into a clothes basket? Well, they might simply think that you just want them to do that because you're mean parents and there's no point to it. They don't understand the purpose of the task. And they also might think that you don't have any tasks like that. Now, I know that sounds ridiculous, but for many kids, they feel like their parents don't have chores. They just go to work like I go to school, so to speak, is what's going on in the kid's mind. So when we sit down and we say, okay, so here's the deal. You need clothes to go to school. It's just a fact. You do. You need clothing. You need to wear clothing, obviously, and you want to make sure it's clean clothing. You don't want to wear stinky stuff. You don't want to wear dirty, wrinkly stuff. So what do we have to do to make sure that you get to school with those clean clothes? Well, here's the steps. First thing is that when you take your clothes off at the end of the day, you need to put them into the dirty clothes basket. Because what that means is I'm then going to go into your room and I'm going to go all the way into your room and grab that dirty clothes basket and I'm going to bring it out to the washer and dryer. I'm actually going to not only wash your clothes, I'm then going to dry your clothes and then I'm going to fold your clothes and then bring them back to you. All you have to do is put them into that dirty clothes basket and put them back into your drawer. And what that does is that allows you to wear clean clothes to school. We don't have time to do that for everything we ask our kids to do, but anytime we can break that down and show the purpose, not just for their tasks, but for everyone, it's going to give them a sense of reward and purpose for doing them. If anytime we can limit just because I said so, it's huge because kids want to have that light, that understanding of what's going on. The other thing that we can do is break things down, and this is very, very hard to distinguish from micromanaging the task as a whole. What we need to do is understand that perhaps our image of how we want something done is a little bit different than our kids, and that's okay. They need to have a little bit of decision and a little bit of a way to kind of vary from our exact image of what things need to be in some circumstances. Obviously, it can't be in all circumstances. That is not at all possible, and we would never ever try and condone that. But anytime that we can allow our kids to do something their way, that we can maybe let it not be as good, is very key because then suddenly they're able to do it their way, and they are the ones who are responsible for the rewards or the negative consequences of what they did. They feel like they're in control. And then also if we can break things down into lots of easily achievable goals. This is huge. So the analogy I like to give for this one is imagine you tell your child they need to save up $100 for whatever X toy they want to buy, toy X, whatever that is. If you tell your child that, many times they're going to get to about $14 and then just give up. They're going to forget about it. They're going to move on. They're going to say it's too much money. They're just going to spend their $14 on something else, all these different pieces. So one thing that I tell parents to do is see what you can do in terms of breaking this down. So the analogy that I give is say that you want your child to save up $100. What do is you break it down and you say first you need to save up $10. And when you save up $10, I'm going to give you $1 as a benefit, as a bonus, as a reward for you earning that $10. Then you need to save up $20 total. And once you do that, I'm going to give you $2 as a reward. Then you save up $30, then $40. And what this does is this enables your child to stay engaged, to get that instant gratification at the beginning. And literally, we're simply shaping them into saving $100 because they're used to waiting and we're slowly building up to that wait time as opposed to throwing the whole thing at them at the very, very beginning. How do we connect effort to reward? Well, please don't think you have to have a reward for everything. That's not possible, and that actually is detrimental. You do not want to reward for everything. That's very, very key. Remember variable ratio rewards at the very beginning when we were talking about how the pellets dropped at random, just like slot machines work? If you give a reward for everything, your child won't work as hard. It's the randomization that's important. But conversely, we need to make sure we're still giving rewards for some things. It can't just be that everything is expected just because I said so. We need to give kids rewards and credit for their accomplishments. Otherwise, the autonomy means nothing. And this is kind of this next big piece that parents typically struggle with, rightfully so. We struggle with it many times at camp. Making things positive, anytime you can, make certain things and rewards that have to be earned instead of just givens that are taken away. So, for example, curfew, it's something that's earned through good time management growing up, kind of in the few months or years leading up to their curfew age. It's not something that they instantaneously get no matter what's happened before, and that's taken away for bad choices. What that means is then your child learns that every time they go out, it's not about making sure that they don't lose their curfew. It's actually about re-earning their curfew. It's a positive thing, not a negative thing. If you can take tangible steps, this is another big piece here. So like we were saying in terms of breaking down that goal with the money saving, as we said earlier, and then also tracking your child's progress in a public way. A lot of, you'll always hear about teachers that use sticker charts. Anything you can put on the fridge in terms of allowing your kids to check off individual items of a task or individual pieces of a chore, kind of go from there. That's really, really big for them. Autonomy, the biggest factor. Well, first, a little bit more science to talk about really quickly with autonomy. There are many, many scientific studies that have come out that talked about what happens to children, to youth, when they're not given at least some autonomy. So when you limit autonomy or the self-determination and choice in adolescence through either physical or psychological control, it directly leads to high rates of externalizing behaviors for control, including delinquency and drug and alcohol use, or internal behaviors for control, including depression, anxiety, poor self-confidence, those different pieces. What this means is that if we don't allow our children opportunity to be in control of some aspects of their life, they will find other ways to do that. One, through externalizing, whether that means they get in control of delinquency, they get in control of the drug and alcohol use, they feel like that's one thing they can control, or through internalizing behaviors as a reaction to not having any. They are depressed because they feel like they can't make a decision. They're anxious because they feel like there's nothing they can do to change their life. They have poor self-confidence, all these different pieces. And this is hard because obviously as adults, there's no way for us to ever take a group of children and say, oh, you're 13, well, I want you get to choose everything that happens in your life, every single decision. That is not at all what we want them to do. And we'll kind of get into that in just one sec. But one important piece, too, to kind of talk about here, Steve Meyer at the University of Boulder found that the more control you have over an event or a stressor in your life is going to directly determine how much that stress is going to alter your functioning and your demeanor and your psychology. And what does that mean? Well, what that means is that if something is considered uncontrollable stress in your mind, it's going to have long-term damaging effects. It's going to lead much more so to those internal and external behaviors we just saw. And if you have control over it, it won't lead to those. The analogy that I like to give is we always talk about the rat race. The 9-to-5 grind, kind of those jobs where we don't have one of those three Gladwell pieces in terms of autonomy or anything like that. People's stress and depression is going to be much more than the CEO of that company. Now, the CEO of that company probably has a lot more stressful factors that they deal with every day, but because they feel in control, they don't have the long-term depression or different pieces associated with it as someone who's in the rat race does, because the person in the rat race doesn't think that they can control it. Now combine all of this science with the emotions of teens and you get something that's a very unique situation. Now, before the age of about 22, the frontal lobe of youth is not fully developed. And what that means is that biologically and psychologically, youth feel threats, punishments, and rewards much more intensely than adults do. They just do because of the way that they're built. And so when they get to a point where they don't feel that they have control, they don't feel a connection between effort and reward, or when they feel like their parents are just saying my way or the highway, that's why more often than not those fights lead to slamming doors, screaming, things like that. If you've ever had to tell your kid that they can't go to prom and they say you're ruining my life, in hindsight, it might be something that we laugh at, but in the moment, your child actually believes that for all intents and purposes because of how much more intensely they feel that punishment than an adult would. So how do we give autonomy? Well, we give the illusion of autonomy. We can't give kids full control, but neither do video games, and we don't do that in camp. What we have to do is give what's called the illusion of autonomy. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, there's a concept called sandboxing. And sandboxing deals where we create an environment where people think they're in control, but in fact they're not. Because we have built the sandbox, we've filled it with a type of sand, the amount of sand that we want, the tools that we want, we know where it is, we know all these different aspects that we've built. Now, within that, They are then able to construct castles or play games or anything like that, but we've designed the environment that they have to operate within. And that essentially controls and or limits the decisions that they can make. Obviously, if we're playing in a dry sandbox and we don't include water, there's no way for them to really use water because it's not part of the tools that we've given them. But they still have control. We're not telling them what kind of castle to build or how to build that castle or anything like that. They still feel like they have decision. They still feel like they have control. And it's called the illusion of autonomy. So in video games, players are choosing what to do within the confines of a sandbox. And they're choosing how to do different types of things as well. So an analogy in real life that I would give is directions. It's a very simple analogy. Say that you have to get from point A to point B. You can tell someone turn-by-turn directions in terms of, you need to take a car or something like that. Or you can just give someone a map and say, this is point A, this is point B. You need to get between those the fastest way possible and let them choose. They then have to deal with, well, do we take a bus? Do we take the subway? Do we take a car? Do we take a taxi? What's the best way to get there? Can we stop somewhere on the way to do something like grab a bite to eat? By giving them that control, you're still defining where they're starting, you're still defining where they're ending, and you've defined the map so you know that they can't go off those streets. They have to stay within those streets that you've just given them. But they're still making decisions, and they feel like they're in control. Now, many parents worry, well, I'm not going to be able to give my kids a big enough sandbox for them to feel engaged at the beginning. And the great thing is you don't have to worry about that, because video games don't do that either. They have something called earning the right to play. So that armor we saw at the very beginning that was worth so much, its value was so high, you have to be level 80 to find it. And to be honest, before you can get that, it's probably going to take you about 400 to 500 hours of continuous gameplay at least to get there, if not more. 400 to 500 hours of playing a video game before you even get one piece of this. Because, oh yeah, you have to first find the gloves, and then you have to find the helmet, then you have to find the shoulders, and there's hours, hundreds of hours between each one of these. They don't give you this right at the very beginning, because if they did, it wouldn't be as valuable. The fact that you have to earn it through a lot of hard work makes it valuable. If diamonds were as commonplace as sand, they wouldn't nearly be as valuable. It's having that hard work and effort that's there. So don't ever worry about you're not going to be able to give your kids, the big pieces they want right away, and so they won't buy into it. Video games don't do it at all. In fact, if you do that, you completely disrupt the system. The fun and rewarding aspect is only appearing because it's hard and because it takes effort. So begin with easy tasks, with a small sandbox. It's exactly what video games do. When video games create, you'll hear about World of Warcraft, for example, has literally an entire world for you to explore, a globe, a sphere with continents and all these different cities and millions of players. But when you start off that game, you're confined to a small little valley. That's it. You don't have any of these tools, any of these weapons. You don't have any of the extra options. And you just have to do very, very small, simple tasks. You earn that. But you also are able to see other players, and those rewards are made known. You see the light at the end of the tunnel, and you understand. So let's start by making this small. Create a sandbox to your satisfaction. Make it something that your children can see the light at the end of the tunnel, but they still have to earn it. And as your child shows responsibility, as they're able to make good decisions, and you realize that, you grow the sandbox or you upgrade their tasks or what they're given accordingly. So this all comes down to what's called logical consequences. It's a concept we use in Kidventure often, especially with our Leeds middle school camp program. What'll happen is we say we go to a community service project and we need to have a list of tasks done. What we might do is we say, okay, we are going to give you guys this week half of these tasks you guys get to decide and work on your own. And if you do that well enough, what we'll do is next week you guys get to decide all of them. But if you don't, then you'll only get to decide 2 of them next week. And they understand the consequences and rewards from the very beginning, and they understand how that sandbox will grow. So instead of saying that they can't do something, we're going to say alternatives instead. The analogy I give here is I have a young nephew named Robert, and Robert does not like to go to bed. He will fall on the ground and scream and flail his arms and cry bloody murder if you ever tell him it's time for bed. So what I do instead is I go up to Robert and I say, hey, Robert, I want to do something very special. Okay, you can't tell your brothers. Okay, it's something special. I only want to do it with you. I want to read you a story, one of your favorite stories, but I know you love these 2 books the best. I don't know which one to pick. Which one should I read? And he'll tell me which one to read. And he knows that his place to read books is in bed. So he hurries to get ready because he wants to read that story with me. I'm presenting him with a choice that he chooses. It's not me telling him what to do. It's not a my way or the highway. And so he's given the illusion of autonomy. I'm creating the buffet for him. I'm creating those choices, but still allowing him to choose. So at the end of the day, video games can seem very addicting because of how they're designed to fulfill a child's or a person's psychological needs. And we as educators and parents, we have an opportunity to use those same techniques to approach and engage those same voids in our children's lives, to engage them in other cool core skills. And when we do that, the positive impact can last a lifetime beyond anything we could ever imagine. Thank you guys again for being with us for this presentation. I'm going to hang around for a little bit for a couple for a couple questions if you guys have any. But beyond that, please feel free to send me any emails. If you want to talk to us about other examples or how we apply these techniques in camp itself, anything like that, please don't ever hesitate to email me. It's Patrick, Patrick, at Kidventure, KIDVENTURE.com. Again, thank you guys for your time this evening. Have a great evening, and we look forward to seeing you guys for more adventures with Kidventure in the future.